My name is Carolyn Miller, I'm 70 years old, and my son tried to throw me out of my own home, just so his family could move in. Before I tell you about the glorious look on his face when he found out I'd sold the house right from under his feet, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The rumble of the U-Haul truck was the first thing I heard. It sounded like thunder rolling down our quiet street in small-town Ohio, a warning of the storm to come. I stood on my porch, my hands gripping the railing so tightly my knuckles were white. Mark, my son, my only child, was on the lawn, his face a blotchy, furious red. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" he yelled, his voice cracking. "Open the door. The movers are on the clock." Behind him, his wife Jessica was trying to quiet our two grandchildren, who were starting to wail, confused by the tension that hung thick in the air. She gave me a weak, pleading look, as if this was all just a simple misunderstanding. I took a slow breath, letting the clean morning air fill my lungs. I looked past my son, past the boxes stacked on the grass I'd spent 40 years tending, and I met his eyes. My voice, when it came out, was calmer than I'd felt in days. It was the calm of a decision made, of a line drawn permanently in the sand. "Not one person," I said, enunciating each word, "and not one box is coming into this house. You are not welcome here." For a second there was dead silence. The birds stopped chirping. Even the kids went quiet. Mark just stared, his mouth hanging open. The sheer shock on his face was almost comical. Then that shock curdled into rage. "Are you crazy?" he spat. "Have you completely lost your mind? We have a deal. You're just a selfish old woman, sitting all alone in this big house." Selfish. The word hit me, but it didn't hurt. Not anymore. He didn't know it, but this so-called madness was the sanest thing I'd done in my entire life. This wasn't a tantrum. It was a plan. A plan born from a lifetime of being taken for granted. A plan that had been set in motion the moment he betrayed me. How did it come to this? How did the boy I raised become the man trying to steal my home, my peace, my very life? It all began last Tuesday, over a cup of coffee that turned to ash in my mouth. I was in my kitchen, the morning sun streaming through the window over the sink, enjoying the quiet hum of the refrigerator. It was my favorite time of day. The house was mine. The quiet was mine. Then the back door opened and Mark walked in without knocking, like he always did, as if he still lived here, as if he owned the place. "Morning, Mom," he said, grabbing a mug from the cabinet. He didn't kiss me hello. He didn't ask how I was sleeping. He just poured himself some coffee and dropped the bombshell that would shatter my world. "So big news," he began, leaning against my counter. "Jessica, the kids, and her mother Diane are moving in here." I just stood there, the coffee pot in my hand. I must have misheard. "What did you say?" He sighed, an impatient sound. "They're moving in. The apartment's too cramped, and we can't afford a caregiver for Diane anymore. She needs supervision. There's plenty of room here, and you're all alone." He said it so casually, like he was announcing he'd bought a new brand of cereal. My blood ran cold. 40 years. 40 years I'd worked at the quilting factory, my fingers raw, my back aching, saving every penny I could after my husband passed. All for this house. This was my sanctuary. My reward. My independence. You can't be serious, Mark," I stammered. "You didn't even ask me." And then he did the one thing that broke my heart and forged my resolve in the same instant. He laughed. It wasn't a warm laugh. It was a short, sharp, dismissive sound. The kind of laugh that says, "Your opinion doesn't matter." "Ask you," he said, shaking his head. "Mom, there's nothing to ask. We've already given our notice on the apartment. It's decided. No discussion. No discussion." Those two words echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of my kitchen. He took a final gulp of his coffee, set the mug in my sink, and patted my shoulder like I was a child who'd just been told what was for dinner. He walked out, thinking his problems were solved. He thought his old, compliant mother, the one who had sacrificed everything for him, would just roll over and accept it. He was about to find out that the woman he just dismissed had a lifetime of strength he'd never seen. As he walked away, a cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. It wasn't sadness. It was steel. He had no idea what he had just unleashed. He left that day smelling of cheap cologne and victory. But as I picked up my phone to call my oldest friend, Brenda, I knew the real battle had just begun. I stood there in the silence of my own kitchen, the coffee pot still in my hand, feeling the weight of it. The whole house suddenly felt different. Smaller. Like the walls were closing in, suffocated by his entitlement. I looked around at the floral wallpaper I'd picked out myself, the little ceramic birds on the windowsill my late husband Tom had bought me. Every corner of this place held a memory, a piece of my life that I had painstakingly built. This house wasn't just wood and nails to me. It was a promise I had made to myself. When Tom died so suddenly, leaving me with a mountain of medical bills and a teenage Mark to raise, I felt like I was drowning. I worked double shifts at the quilting factory, my fingers getting stiff and sore, just to keep our heads above water. I packed Mark's lunches, went to all his football games, helped him with his college applications. I poured every ounce of myself into him, into making sure he had a better start than I did. And when he was finally settled, I started saving. I gave up vacations. I wore my coats until they were threadbare. I'd eat soup for dinner 5 nights a week. All for this. For a place where I could finally rest. A place where no one could tell me what to do. And in one 5-minute conversation, my son had tried to turn my sanctuary into a crowded boarding house. He hadn't just disrespected me. He had erased my entire life struggle. He looked at my 40 years of sacrifice and saw nothing but 3 empty bedrooms he could use. He saw a solution to his problems, a free-of-charge caregiver for his mother-in-law, a live-in maid and cook. He didn't see his mother. A hot, bitter anger rose in my throat, so sharp it tasted like acid. He thought I was weak. He thought that because I was 70 I was finished. An afterthought. A resource to be managed. For years I had been the peacemaker, the one who smoothed things over, the one who gave in to avoid a fight. I did it because I loved him, because I wanted him to be happy. But looking at the greasy mug he'd left in my sink for me to wash, I realized that my constant giving hadn't earned me love or respect. It had only taught him that my boundaries were suggestions, that my comfort was disposable. His words echoed in my head. It's decided. No discussion. The arrogance of it was breathtaking. He had made a decision about my life in my home, and hadn't even afforded me the courtesy of a conversation. It was the tone he used that really cut deep. It was the same tone his father used to use when he was tired of arguing, the tone that said, "I am the man and what I say goes." I had lived under that thumb for 30 years of my marriage. I had sworn to myself after Tom passed that I would never, ever let a man make me feel powerless in my own home again. And now my own son was trying to do just that. I put the coffee pot down, my hand steady now. The shock had worn off, replaced by something cold and clear. Determination. He had made a critical mistake. He assumed the woman who raised him was the same woman standing before him today. He didn't know that the last 10 years of living alone, of making my own choices, of finding my own voice had changed me. He had poked a sleeping bear, and he had no idea of the strength I had stored up. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to plead. I was going to fight. Not with yelling and screaming. That was his style. I was going to fight with a plan. A plan that had been quietly forming in the back of my mind for months, ever since his cousin Gary started whispering in his ear about his future inheritance. Mark had just given me the reason to finally set it in motion. I picked up my phone. It felt solid and heavy in my hand like a weapon. I scrolled to Brenda's number and pressed call. The phone rang once, twice. "Brenda," I said when she answered, my voice even. "I need your help. Mark just declared war." Brenda was at my house in 20 minutes with a thermos of her own coffee and a look of grim understanding. Brenda and I had been friends for 50 years. We'd seen each other through childbirth, the death of our husbands, and the infuriating process of watching our children become adults who sometimes acted like complete strangers. She sat at my kitchen table, listened to the whole story without interrupting once, her hand resting over mine. When I finished, she shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Carolyn, that boy. I swear. Don't you dare give in. Don't even let them bring a suitcase through the door for one night. Once they're in, you'll never get them out. It's what happened to my sister with her daughter. It starts with a weekend and ends with them repainting the living room." "I have no intention of giving in," I said, feeling stronger just having her here. "But it's worse than you think, Brenda. This wasn't a spontaneous, stupid idea. I told her about Mark's cousin Gary. Gary was a weasel of a man who'd failed at every business he'd ever tried and now called himself a financial consultant. For the last 6 months, every time he saw Mark, he'd make comments. Sly little remarks about the rising property values in my neighborhood. "That house is a goldmine, Marky," he'd say at family barbecues. "You're sitting on a real asset there. A man's got to protect his inheritance." Inheritance. The word was poison. He'd planted a seed of greed in my son's mind, and Mark, who was always looking for an easy way out of his financial messes, had let it grow. He'd stopped seeing this house as my home and started seeing it as his future paycheck. "So you see," I told Brenda, "this isn't just about them needing a place to live. This is the first step. If they move in, they establish residency. Then when I'm gone, it's harder for anyone to make them leave. Or worse, they'll start making me feel like a guest in my own home, until I can't take it anymore, and move into one of those dreadful assisted living places." Brenda's eyes widened. "He wouldn't. His cousin would," I corrected her. "And Mark would let him. That's why I have to do something drastic." I took a deep breath. "Brenda, I have a plan. I've had it for a while now, just in case something like this happened. I've been talking to a real estate lawyer, a friend of Tom's nephew. Quietly. For the last 6 months." The surprise on her face was exactly what I needed. She thought I was just going to tell Mark no. She didn't realize I was preparing for a full-scale liberation. I laid it all out for her. The secret savings account I'd opened years ago, the one Mark knew nothing about, where I'd stashed away every dollar I made from selling my quilts at the local craft fair. The research I'd done on smaller, more manageable condos in the next town over. She listened, her expression shifting from concern to awe. I wasn't just reacting, I had been proactive. I had seen the storm clouds gathering long before the first raindrop fell. I had honored the old saying, "Hope for the best but prepare for the worst." When I was done, she didn't tell me I was overreacting. She didn't tell me to try and talk things out with Mark. She didn't question my sanity or my resolve. She just looked at me, a slow smile spreading across her face, the smile of a co-conspirator who was ready for a little rebellion. She leaned forward, her eyes twinkling with a fire I hadn't seen in years. "Well, I'll be," she whispered. "Carolyn Miller. You are full of surprises." She refilled our coffee cups and then asked the 5 most beautiful words I had ever heard. "What do you need me to do?" Having an ally, a true friend who didn't judge but just prepared for battle alongside me, felt like a fortress rising up around me. I finally had someone in my corner. My plan was already in motion, a series of dominoes I had carefully set up. Mark's arrogant announcement hadn't trapped me. It had just given me the push I needed to topple the first one. But before I could execute the final steps, the enemy sent in their first wave. The next morning my doorbell rang. It was Jessica, my daughter-in-law, holding a pink box from the fancy bakery downtown. She had a smile plastered on her face, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was the same smile she used when she wanted me to babysit on short notice. It was her sweeten up the old lady's smile. "Carolyn." "Good morning," she chirped a little too brightly. "I brought some of those donuts you like, the raspberry-filled ones." "How thoughtful of you, Jessica," I said, my voice neutral. I held the screen door open for her. "Come in. Would you like some coffee?" "Oh, I'd love some." I knew this wasn't a social call. This was a mission. Mark had sent her in as his diplomat. His soft power approach after his brute force tactic had, to his surprise, met resistance. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where her husband had detonated our family just 24 hours earlier. She chattered away as I poured the coffee. "The kids are just so excited," she said, not looking at me. "Little Chloe has already planned where she's going to put her dollhouse in the sewing room. And my mom, Diane. Honestly, Carolyn, this is such a blessing. She's been so worried about living alone, and she's so grateful to you for this." Grateful to me. As if I had offered. As if I were a benevolent queen bestowing a great gift upon my subjects. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. My sewing room, my sacred space, filled with half-finished quilts and the hum of my machine, was already being redecorated in her mind. I placed her coffee in front of her and sat down, folding my hands on the table. I decided to cut through the fluff. "Jessica," I began, my voice calm and even, "can I ask you a question?" "Of course, anything," she said, finally meeting my gaze. Did you and Mark ever at any point plan on asking me if I was okay with this arrangement? The smile on her face faltered. It was like a little crack in a porcelain doll. She blinked. Well, Mark said he talked to you. He told me you were on board with it. He said you were lonely here, all by yourself in this big house, and that you'd love the company. There it was. The lie. The foundation of their entire plan was built on a lie he'd told his own wife. He hadn't just disrespected me. He'd deceived her too. He'd painted me as a pathetic, lonely old woman so she wouldn't have to feel guilty about participating in this home invasion. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment. I watched her fidget with her napkin. Jessica, I am not lonely, I said, my voice soft but firm. I have my friends. I have my quilting circle. I have my garden. My life is very full. This house isn't too big for me. It's perfect for me. Her face fell. For the first time, I think she was seeing the situation for what it was, not what Mark had told her it was. She was realizing she was a pawn in her husband's selfish game. But he said, she stammered. He said a lot of things, didn't he? I pushed, keeping my voice level. Did he tell you he asked for my permission? Did he tell you we discussed the terms, the finances, the timeline? Did he tell you I accepted willingly? Each question was a small, precise jab. She had no defense. The color drained from her cheeks. She knew the answer to all of them was no. She had been an accomplice, and she was only just now realizing the crime. We thought. You thought about what was convenient for you, I finished for her. You thought about solving your money problems and your space problems, and you decided I was the solution. You didn't think about me at all. She was speechless. The calculated sweetness was gone, replaced by a dawning horror. You don't want us to come, she whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Let me ask you this, Jessica. Would you want your husband to tell you without discussion that his entire family was moving into your home? Indefinitely. She couldn't answer. She just stared down at the untouched box of donuts, a pathetic pink monument to her failed mission. Finally, desperation kicked in. But we've already packed everything. We told the landlord we're leaving. We told the kids. And those, I said, standing up to signal the conversation was over, are the consequences of decisions you made without all the information, problems you created. They are not my problems to solve. She stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. Her face was no longer confused. It was hard with anger. She was angry that the easy solution had suddenly become complicated. She was angry at me. Mark told me you would agree, she said, her voice sharp. And Mark, I replied, opening the door for her, was wrong. She left without another word, leaving the donuts on the table. I knew she'd run straight to Mark. I knew she would tell him that sweet-talking his mother hadn't worked. I braced myself. The hurricane was coming. The hurricane didn't come in the way I expected. 2 days passed in an eerie quiet. No angry phone calls, no surprise visits. It was a silence that felt heavy, unnatural. I told myself they were regrouping, trying to figure out their next move. I spent the time talking to my lawyer, making arrangements and trying to keep my nerves from fraying. But on Thursday afternoon, I learned that their silence wasn't an action. It was something far more sinister. The phone rang and the caller ID showed the number for my local bank branch, the one I'd used for 20 years. Carolyn Miller speaking, I answered. Mrs. Miller, hi. This is Bill Henderson down at Ohio Mutual Bank. Bill was the branch manager. A kind man in his late 50s who had helped me set up a retirement fund after Tom passed. Bill, how are you? I asked, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. The bank never called. I'm well, thank you. Listen, Carolyn, I'm calling about something a little unusual. I just wanted to check in and make sure everything is all right with you. I'm fine, Bill. Is there a problem with my account? He hesitated. No, not with your account. But well, I received a call this morning from your son, Mark. The knot in my stomach turned to ice. Oh, I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. Yes. He expressed, let's call it deep concern about your well-being. Bill's voice was laced with professional caution, but I could hear the skepticism underneath. He said that you've been acting erratically lately, that you seem confused and are making some questionable decisions. He mentioned something about you being under a lot of stress. I sank into the chair by the phone, my legs suddenly weak. I couldn't breathe. This was a whole new level of betrayal. It wasn't just about the house. What exactly did he want, Bill? I whispered. He was inquiring about the process for placing a temporary hold on your accounts. My jaw dropped. He said he was worried you might be taken advantage of, and that he wanted to, and I'm quoting here, protect your assets until you're feeling more yourself. Protect my assets. My money. The money I had worked my entire life for. He had tried to seize control of my finances. He had called my bank and tried to paint me as an incompetent old woman, a senile fool who couldn't be trusted with her own checkbook. If he had succeeded, I would have been helpless. I wouldn't have been able to pay my lawyer, access my secret savings, or move forward with my plan. He was trying to trap me, to cut off my escape at the knees. My blood boiled. This wasn't just disrespect anymore. This was a calculated, vicious attack on my independence, my very identity as a capable adult. And what did you tell him? I asked, my voice trembling with a rage so profound it almost choked me. I told him, Bill said, and I could hear the quiet satisfaction in his voice, that I have known you for 20 years, and in all that time you have been one of my sharpest and most responsible clients. I told him that for the bank to take such a drastic step, we would need a court order signed by a judge, based on a medical evaluation, and that a concerned phone call from a potential heir certainly didn't qualify. Relief washed over me, so intense it made me dizzy. I was lucky, so incredibly lucky, that Bill Henderson was an old-school banker who valued relationships over procedures. If it had been some new, young employee who didn't know me, they might have been intimidated. They might have put a temporary flag on my account, which would have been enough to derail everything. He wasn't happy about that, I take it, I said. No, he was not, Bill confirmed. He became quite agitated, started talking about getting a lawyer involved. Carolyn, I'm not trying to meddle in family business, but it felt like I should let you know. It sounded less like concern and more like, well, it sounded ugly. Thank you, Bill, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Thank you more than you know. You did the right thing. After I hung up, I sat in the chair for a long time, the phone still in my hand. The quiet of my house no longer felt peaceful. It felt like the calm before a war. They had failed to take my home through manipulation, so now they were trying to take it by stripping me of my power, my agency. They wanted to have me declared incompetent. The sheer cruelty of it took my breath away. They hadn't just declared war. They had brought out the heavy artillery. But they had no idea I already had my army of one, my friend Brenda. And my secret weapon was locked, loaded, and ready to fire. That evening, Mark's car screeched into my driveway. He didn't bother with the door this time. He used the key I'd given him years ago for emergencies and stormed in like he was raiding the place. The fury coming off him was a physical force. What did you do? He roared, standing in the middle of my living room. He wasn't asking, he was accusing. I'm not sure what you mean, Mark, I said, turning down the volume on the television. I refused to let him see me flustered. I folded my hands in my lap and looked at him calmly. Don't play dumb with me. You know exactly what I mean. The bank. Bill Henderson called me back. Said he couldn't discuss my mother's private financial information. You called him, didn't you? You told him I was trying to steal your money. I didn't have to tell him anything, Mark. He figured that out all on his own. He's a smart man. The color rose in his neck, a deep angry red. This is unbelievable. I was trying to protect you. You're not thinking clearly. You're throwing away your family for what? For a quiet house? That's what's so important to you. My dignity is important to me, I said, my voice quiet but sharp as glass. My independence is important to me. My right to make my own decisions is important to me. Things you seem to have forgotten. Oh, here we go, he sneered, throwing his hands up in the air. Saint Carolyn the martyr. You know, for years all you've done is complain about being lonely. Now when your family, your only family, needs you, you slam the door in our face. You are a selfish, bitter old woman. Selfish. The word again. His favorite weapon. But it had lost its power over me. I am not selfish for wanting to live in peace in the home I paid for. I am not selfish for refusing to be a solution to the problems you created. And I am not bitter. I am, for the first time in a very long time, being honest. We stared at each other across the room. It felt like a chasm had opened between us, one that could never be bridged. I was looking at my son, the baby I had rocked to sleep, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, but all I could see was a stranger with a greedy, resentful look in his eyes. "What has gotten into you?" he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. "Is it Brenda? Has she been filling your head with all this feminist nonsense about finding your voice?" "Brenda has been a good friend to me," I replied evenly. "Unlike some people, she actually listens to what I want." The argument was going nowhere. He wasn't here to understand. He was here to bully me into submission. He started pacing my living room the same way he had on Tuesday, but this time there was no pretense of a loving son. This was a man cornered. "Fine," he said, stopping in front of me, looming over my chair. "You want to be difficult? Let's be difficult. We need a place to live, Mom. I am your son. I have a right to be here. A family has a right to stick together. A family asks for help, Mark. It doesn't demand a surrender," I said, standing up so I could look him in the eye. "A family doesn't call a bank and try to have their mother declared mentally unfit just so they can get their hands on her money." His face went pale. He had no idea Bill had told me the details. He thought he could get away with it. That's not what happened," he stammered. "Isn't it? Then what exactly did you hope to achieve by telling my banker I was confused?" He had no answer. He was caught. The raw, ugly truth of what he had done was hanging in the air between us. His desperation had made him cruel, and now he was exposed. He took a step back, his face twisting into a sneer. "You know what? Gary was right about you all along," he spat. "He said you were clutching onto this house like it was a pile of gold. He said you'd rather let your own family struggle on the street than give up an inch of what you think is yours." He was right. The mention of Gary confirmed everything. This wasn't just Mark's idea. This was a plot hatched by two greedy men. My son, and the cousin who was whispering in his ear like a devil on his shoulder. He pointed a finger at me. "This isn't over. You think you've won? You haven't won anything. You've just lost your family." He stormed out, slamming the front door so hard that a picture frame on the wall rattled. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, not from fear, but from a strange, exhilarating clarity. The lines had been drawn. The gloves were off. I knew his threat wasn't empty. He would be back, and he would be more vicious than ever. It was time to launch my counteroffensive. The next morning, on Friday, there was no fear. There was only purpose. I woke up before the sun, showered, and put on my favorite blue dress, the one I always wore for important occasions. When Brenda's car pulled into my driveway at precisely 9 o'clock, I was waiting on the porch with my purse and a single heavy file folder. "Are you ready for this?" Brenda asked, her expression a mixture of excitement and concern. "I've been ready for this for 6 months," I said, getting into the car. He just gave me the final reason I needed. Our first destination was not the bank, but a small, unassuming brick building downtown with a simple sign that read, "Fields and Associates, Real Estate Law." Mr. Fields, a kind, silver-haired man who was the nephew of an old friend of my late husband, was waiting for us. He'd been handling everything for me with the utmost discretion. "Carolyn, Brenda, good morning," he said, shaking our hands and leading us into his quiet, wood-paneled office. "The documents are all here. Are you sure you want to proceed?" He was obligated to ask one last time. He looked me in the eye, searching for any hint of doubt. He found none. "More sure than I've been about anything in my entire life," I replied. He slid a thick stack of papers across the polished mahogany desk. I took the pen he offered, my hand perfectly steady. I signed my name, Carolyn Miller, over and over again. With each stroke of the pen, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. It was the weight of expectation, of obligation, of a future I did not want. The final signature was on the deed. I pushed the papers back to him. It was done. "Congratulations, Carolyn," Mr. Fields said with a gentle smile. "The funds have been transferred. The house on Maple Street is officially sold." Sold. The word hung in the air. My home of 40 years, the place where I had raised my son and mourned my husband, was no longer mine. A pang of sadness hit me, sharp and quick. but it was immediately replaced by a wave of intoxicating relief. I was free. And the other transaction is also complete, he added, sliding a new, much smaller folder toward me. Here are the keys to your new condominium. Welcome to Willow Creek. Brenda squeezed my hand under the table. She knew what this meant. It wasn't just a new set of keys, it was a new life. A life no one else knew about. A life that was completely 100% mine. We left the lawyer's office and walked out into the bright morning sun. It felt like I was seeing the world in color for the first time in a long time. How do you feel? Brenda asked. I feel like I can finally breathe, I said. We went to our favorite little diner for lunch to celebrate. We didn't get fancy champagne, we got cheeseburgers and milkshakes like a couple of teenagers skipping school. We laughed louder than we had in years. He has no idea, does he? Brenda said, wiping a tear of laughter from her eye. Not a clue, I confirmed. He thinks he's moving his family into my house tomorrow. He thinks he's won. He's planning on a life of free rent, with a built-in babysitter and caregiver. The sheer audacity of his plan seemed almost absurd now that I had dismantled it so completely. He wasn't just going to be disappointed. He was going to be blindsided. The fallout would be spectacular, and for the first time I wasn't afraid of it. I was ready. As we were finishing our milkshakes, my phone buzzed. It was Mark. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later it buzzed again. A text message. I opened it. Mom, we need to talk. This has gone too far. I'll be there tomorrow at 9 a.m. with the truck. Be reasonable. Be reasonable. He was ordering me to be reasonable. I showed the text to Brenda. She just snorted into her milkshake. Oh, he's going to get a lesson in reasonable tomorrow, all right, she said. The papers were signed. The house was no longer mine. My new life was waiting for me in a small, quiet condo across town. All that was left was for the curtain to rise on the final act. All that was left was to wait for the moving truck to arrive. That Friday afternoon, as I was packing a small suitcase with my most important belongings, my photo albums, Tom's wedding ring, my favorite quilting shears, the mailman came. Among the usual stack of bills and junk mail was a crisp, cream-colored envelope. It had the return address of a law firm I didn't recognize. My heart gave a little jolt. This was it. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. It wasn't a long letter. It was a single page filled with cold, menacing legal jargon. It was a formal letter of intent. It was from a lawyer representing my son, Mark Miller. And it was co-signed by his cousin, Gary. The letter stated that due to my recent erratic behavior, social isolation, and questionable financial decisions, they had no choice but to explore all legal options to ensure my well-being. It went on to say they were in the process of compiling evidence to petition the court for a temporary emergency guardianship over my person and my estate. I had to read that line twice. Guardianship. They were going to stand up in a court of law and argue that I was no longer mentally competent to make my own decisions. They were trying to have me legally declared insane. It was a masterstroke of cruelty, and it had Gary's slimy fingerprints all over it. This was their checkmate. If a judge granted them guardianship, they would have control over everything. They could stop the sale of the house. They could take over my bank accounts. They could force me into a nursing home and move into my house with the court's blessing. They could erase me from my own life. A wave of nausea washed over me. For a split second, I felt a paralyzing fear. They were my own flesh and blood, and they were trying to destroy me. They were willing to humiliate me, to strip me of my rights, to paint me as a crazy old woman. All for a piece of property. The betrayal was so absolute, so profound, it was almost biblical. But then, as I stood there in my living room, surrounded by the boxes of a life I was about to leave behind, the fear subsided. It was replaced by a cold, hard rage that burned away all the doubt. I looked at the letter again. I saw past the threatening legal terms, and I started to laugh. It was a quiet laugh at first, then it grew louder, filling the empty house. It was the laugh of a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. They thought this letter was a weapon to break me. They had no idea they had just handed me a gift. This letter wasn't just a threat. It was evidence. It was a signed confession of their true intentions. It was irrefutable proof of their greed and their malice. Any lingering shred of guilt I might have felt about selling the house, about cutting Mark out, vanished in that moment. They had justified every single action I had taken. They had confirmed that I wasn't overreacting. I was surviving. I carefully folded the letter and placed it in the file folder with the new deed to my condo and the closing documents from the sale of my house. It was the final piece of my arsenal. The last piece of ammunition I would need for the battle tomorrow. Brenda called a few minutes later. "Did you get it?" she asked, her voice tight. I knew Mr. Fields had warned her it might be coming. "Oh yes," I said, my voice clear and strong. "I got it. It's even worse than we thought. Carolyn, are you okay? I can come right over." "Don't you worry about me," I told her. "I am more than okay. I am ready." They thought this letter would be the end of me, that I would crumble in fear and hand over the keys. Instead, it became the final nail in their own coffin. Tomorrow the show would begin. And so we're back to where we started. Saturday morning, 9 a.m. sharp. The U-Haul truck blocking my driveway. My son's face turning purple with rage on my front lawn. He was in the middle of his tirade, his voice echoing down the quiet street. "I'm calling my lawyer," he screamed, pulling out his phone. "I'm going to have you declared incompetent. You're not in your right mind, and I can prove it." That's when I smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a little curve of my lips, but it stopped him cold. It was the last thing he expected. He was expecting tears, begging a final desperate surrender. He was not expecting a smile. "Go ahead, Mark," I said, my voice carrying easily in the morning air. "Call your lawyer. And when he gets here, make sure he brings the deed that proves this house is yours. Because I have the paperwork right here that proves it belongs to a lovely young family named Davidson." The confusion on his face was a picture. He blinked, shaking his head slightly as if to clear water from his ears. What did you say? What are you talking about?" He didn't have to wait long for an answer. Right on cue, a shiny new SUV pulled up to the curb behind the U-Haul. A man and a woman, both in their early 30s, got out. They were holding hands and had the bright, excited look of new homeowners. They looked at the moving truck, at my son's furious face, and then at me standing calmly on the porch. The young man walked toward us, his smile polite but firm. "Good morning," he said cheerfully. "We're the Davidsons. I think you might be blocking our driveway." He looked from Mark to me. "Is there a problem here?" Mark stared at him, then back at me, his mind visibly struggling to process the impossible situation unfolding before him. He looked like a computer that had just been fed a paradox. Jessica, who had been trying to herd the crying children, froze, her hand halfway to her mouth. "You're your driveway?" Mark stammered, looking at the young man. "Yes," Mr. Davidson replied, his smile tightening just a little. "We closed on the house yesterday afternoon. This is our house." All the air seemed to go out of my son. He physically deflated, his shoulders slumping. He turned to me, his eyes wide with a horror so profound it was almost satisfying to watch. It was the look of a chess player who had just realized he'd been checkmated 10 moves ago, and hadn't even seen it coming. "You sold it," he whispered, the words barely audible. "You sold the house?" "I sold my house, Mark," I corrected him gently. "It was never yours to begin with." "No," he said, shaking his head, his voice rising with panic. "No, you can't. That's illegal. I'll sue you. I'll sue them." He jabbed a finger toward the Davidsons, who were now looking genuinely alarmed. "I don't think you will," I said. I walked back into the house for a moment and came out with the file folder. I opened it and took out the lawyer's letter he had sent me. Because this little document, the one you and Gary so thoughtfully signed, proves that your only interest in this house was financial. It proves you were willing to have me declared mentally incompetent to get it. I wonder what a judge would think about that. I wonder what Mr. and Mrs. Davidson's lawyer would think about that. I held the letter out. He flinched as if it were a snake. The color drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. He had been so sure of his power, so certain of my weakness, that he had handed me the very weapon I needed to destroy him. Mr. Davidson stepped forward. "Sir," he said to Mark, his voice no longer friendly, "I think you and your family need to leave. You are trespassing on our property." The final public humiliation was complete. The movers, who had been watching this whole soap opera unfold with great interest, started to look uncomfortable. One of them walked over to Mark. So, boss? What do you want us to do with all this stuff? The look on my son's face, a mixture of disbelief, horror, and utter defeat, was something I would never forget. All his plans, all his arrogance, all his greedy dreams, had just turned to dust on the lawn of a house that was no longer his. But his nightmare was just beginning. The movers were looking at Mark, waiting for an answer he didn't have. He just stared at the house, at the new owners, at the letter in my hand. He was trapped. There was no way out. The public nature of his defeat was the most brutal part. Our neighbors were starting to peek out from behind their curtains. Mrs. Henderson from next door was suddenly very interested in weeding her petunias. Sir? The mover asked again, more insistently this time. This truck is rented by the hour. That seemed to snap Mark out of his trance. He looked at the truck filled with his family's belongings, a monument to his failed coup. He looked at his crying children and his shell-shocked wife. And then he did something that told me everything I needed to know. He didn't look at me with remorse. He didn't look at me with sadness for our broken relationship. He looked at me with pure, undiluted hatred. Mr. Davidson, seeing that Mark was catatonic, took charge. You all need to get this truck and your vehicles off my property. Now. The finality in his voice was undeniable. Jessica finally seemed to grasp the reality of the situation. She grabbed Mark's arm, her voice a shrill whisper. Mark, do something. Where are we supposed to go? Where were they supposed to go? It was the question they should have asked themselves before they gave notice on their apartment, before they packed a single box, before they decided my life was theirs for the taking. Mark finally moved. He stumbled over to the curb and sat down heavily, putting his head in his hands. And he began to cry. Not silent, dignified tears. He sobbed like a child who had just had his favorite toy snatched away. But I knew what he was crying for. He wasn't crying for his mother. He wasn't crying for the family he had just fractured beyond repair. He was crying for the house, for the money, for the easy life he had planned out for himself at my expense. He looked up at me, his face streaked with tears and dirt. How could you? He choked out. This was the family house. This was where the kids were supposed to grow up. This was our inheritance. There it was. The ugly, greedy truth laid bare for all to hear. It was never about family. It was about property. It was about what he thought he was owed. I walked down the porch steps and stood on the lawn, a few feet away from him. My anger was gone, replaced by a deep, aching pity. Your inheritance, Mark, I said, my voice soft but clear, was the love I gave you. It was the education I worked my fingers to the bone to provide. It was the values I tried to teach you about honesty and respect, values you have clearly forgotten. This house, I said, gesturing to the beautiful home behind me, was the promise I made to myself, not to you. I turned away from him. There was nothing more to say. Brenda had just pulled up in her car, parking quietly down the street, my getaway driver. She gave me a small, supportive nod. It was time to go. As I walked toward her car, Jessica blocked my path. Her face was a mask of fury. I hope you're happy, she hissed. I hope you enjoy being all alone for the rest of your miserable life. I won't be alone, Jessica, I said, looking her right in the eye. I have my friends. And I have my self-respect. It turns out, that's much better company than a family who doesn't value me. I got into Brenda's car without looking back. As we pulled away, I could see them in the rearview mirror. A broken little group on the sidewalk surrounded by their boxes with nowhere to go. It was a mess of their own making. For a fleeting moment, a pang of motherly guilt tried to surface, but I pushed it down. My son was a 40-year-old man. It was time he learned to clean up his own messes. As we drove away, I didn't look back. I was driving toward my future. But I knew the past would eventually try to catch up with me. 3 months later, the chaos of that Saturday morning felt like a scene from someone else's life. My new home was a quiet 2-bedroom condo in Willow Creek, a town about 30 minutes away. It wasn't a grand house with a big yard, but it was perfect. It was bright, modern, and blessedly peaceful. The only person who walked in without knocking was Brenda, and she always brought cake. Life settled into a new, wonderful rhythm. I joined a quilting club that met at the local community center. The women there didn't know me as Mark's mom. They knew me as Carolyn, the one who was a wizard with a sewing machine and told funny stories about her travels. I wasn't just a mother or a widow anymore. I was a person again. I was becoming myself. The money from the sale of the house was sitting safely in an account that only I and my lawyer knew about. For the first time in my life, I had a real financial cushion. It wasn't about being rich, it was about being secure. It was the freedom to buy a new brand of coffee without checking the price, the freedom to take a weekend trip with Brenda to the coast, the freedom of knowing I was dependent on no one. I had blocked Mark's number. I had blocked Jessica's. And I had most certainly blocked Gary's. My sister had called a few times in the beginning, telling me I was being cruel and that the family was in an uproar, but I stood my ground. My decision is made, Helen, I'd told her. You can either respect it or you can stop calling. She eventually stopped calling. The silence was a balm to my soul. I knew through the grapevine that Mark and Jessica had ended up moving into a cramped, expensive rental apartment. Life, I heard, was not easy for them. A part of me, the mother in me, felt a twinge of sadness at that. But the woman I was becoming knew it was a consequence they had earned. Then one Tuesday afternoon, the doorman buzzed up to my apartment. Mrs. Miller, there's a letter here for you. It was hand-delivered. My heart did a little flutter. I rarely got personal mail. I went downstairs and the doorman handed me a simple white envelope. My name, Carolyn Miller, was written on the front in messy, familiar handwriting. It was from Mark. I took it back upstairs and set it on my kitchen counter. I stared at it for a long time. My first instinct was to throw it in the trash, unopened. What more could there be to say? Was it a letter from his lawyer, announcing a lawsuit? Was it another tirade of angry words? I was afraid to open it, afraid to let the ugliness of the past seep into the beautiful, peaceful present I had built. My hands trembled as I picked it up. Part of me wanted to burn it, to pretend it never arrived. But another part, a deeper part, knew I had to face it. I had come this far. I had faced him down on my own lawn. I could certainly face down a piece of paper. With a deep breath, I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out the single folded page inside. Was this another attack or something else entirely? The letter was short, written on a piece of lined paper torn from a spiral notebook. The words were clumsy, the handwriting almost childish. It wasn't an eloquent apology, but maybe that's what made it feel real. Mom, it began. I don't know if you'll even read this. I know I don't deserve it. These last few months have been hard. Harder than I thought. I wanted to tell you that I was wrong. I was wrong to disrespect you, and I was wrong to try and take your home. I was listening to the wrong people like Gary. I haven't spoken to him since that day. I let my own problems make me into someone I don't like. I am sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me. But the kids miss their grandma. They ask about you all the time. That's all. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Mark. I read it 3 times. There was no demand. No justification. No subtle blame shifting. It was just an apology. A broken, simple, and honest apology from a man who had finally hit rock bottom and realized the hole he was in was one he had dug himself. I didn't answer it right away. I let the words sit with me for a week. I talked to Brenda about it. The grandkids are innocent in all this, she said wisely. But this has to be on your terms, Carolyn. Completely on your terms. She was right. The following Tuesday, I picked up the phone and called him. He answered on the first ring, his voice tentative. Mom. Mark, I said, my voice calm and steady. I received your letter. You did. He sounded surprised and relieved. Yes. And I want to make something very clear. Forgiveness is a long road. But your children are my grandchildren, and I love them. They have done nothing wrong. I took a breath. They can come and visit me. They can stay for a weekend once a month. But they will come here as my beloved guests, not as your leverage or my obligation. And you and I, we will be civil for their sake. Our relationship, if it is ever to be rebuilt, will be based on a respect you have yet to earn back. Do you understand? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing. Yes, Mom, he finally said, his voice thick. I understand. Thank you. And that was the start. It wasn't a magical fix. It was the first hesitant step on a new path. The grandkids came to visit the next weekend. There was no big, dramatic reunion. I just hugged them, baked cookies, and let them play in my sewing room. Mark and Jessica dropped them off at the door and picked them up politely. There were no arguments. There was only a quiet, fragile truce. My life is my own now, in a way it never was before. My home is a place of peace. My days are filled with my own choices. The relationship with my son is different. It's more distant, but it's more honest. Maybe in time it will heal. Maybe it won't. But either way, I will be okay. I spent 70 years of my life learning to be a good daughter, a good wife, and a good mother. It was only after all that I finally learned how to be good to myself. That house on Maple Street was just brick and mortar. My real home, the one no one can ever take from me, is the dignity and self-respect I fought so hard to reclaim. Don't ever let anyone, not even the people you love the most, take that away from you. Your voice matters. Your peace matters. You matter. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I hope it helps someone out there feel a little less alone. Have you ever had to draw a line in the sand with your own family? Let me know your story in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please give this video a like and subscribe for more stories. You are stronger than you think.